Welcome back to the Zero Lab. Today we are going to be taking a look at the Vancouver Regional results from the past weekend. This is the last regional in the Paradox Rift / Paldean Fates format of this season. So we're going to be taking a look at the top 8 decks, what did well, and then also going to look at this in light of the new set coming out and what decks in this top 8 do we see translating over to the new post-rotation Temporal Forces format and potentially being able to do well in that format as well at tournaments like EUIC and the Orlando Regionals that are coming up in just a few weeks. So we had some surprises here in Vancouver with 2 Miraidons in the top 8. Miraidon is a deck that had sort of fallen off a little bit in the Paradox Rift format. It was hindered a lot by the fact that it had or could have a pretty difficult Charizard matchup as well as a difficult Roaring Moon matchup at times. However, we did see 2 Miraidon lists get into the top 8, and Miraidon ultimately won the tournament. So we'll take a look at Nathan Beck's first place list here to start off with, and it's a few interesting things to note in here. Obviously, this is the Peony build of Miraidon, so utilizing that Peony supporter to discard your hand and search your deck for 2 trainer cards, and so you can pretty aggressively go find those electric generators, those 4 seal stones, those Pokemon catchers, all that different sort of stuff, and then utilize that Mew EX's restart ability to draw your hand back up to 3. So this deck is looking to be really fast and aggressive, as Miraidon always is, but the Peony build is even more fast and aggressive than other versions of Miraidon. Miraidon was able to take down Stall in the finals. We had a Block Lax in the finals as the second place list, and I wouldn't say that there's anything too crazy about this list. One interesting thing is they did choose to play the Pokemon League headquarters, which is a stadium that we sometimes see come into these Block Lax lists, and specifically it is very good into the Miraidon matchup. But unfortunately for the Stall player, that matchup can be a little bit difficult. Miraidon does play a good amount of switching cards, and then it does have plenty of attackers in the deck, so it's hard to stall something active unless you're able to get like the Lumineon or Squawkabilly stuck, because the Mew EX isn't a horrible attacker into that matchup. It's one way to get through the Mimikyu. You also have the Zapdos to get through the Mimikyu. So Miraidon can be a tough matchup for Stall players and proved to be so in the finals. Then our top 4 was made up of 2 Gardevoir EX decks. Oops, opened it in the wrong thing. Open as image. Nothing too crazy in here. We do see that they decided to play the Turo scenario plus Palpad, so respecting that Stall matchup. Unfortunately, I believe this player did end up losing to Stall in top 4. So even with those techs, wasn't quite able to get around Stall, but nothing too crazy otherwise in this Gardevoir deck. And then we had Rowan Stavenau, who's had a great season playing Gardevoir as well, and they also chose to play the Turo and Palpad. I think this might actually be the same 60, and they lost to Miraidon in top 4. Miraidon always been a pretty tough matchup for Gardevoir ever since that Iron Hands came out, and yeah, one of the big appeals of playing Miraidon in this format was Gardevoir was seen as one of the top decks in the format, had a good matchup into things like Charizard and Giratina, and so Gardevoir was a good play for the tournament as Miraidon had fallen off a little bit, and then Miraidon comes in and takes the win for the last regional of the format. The rest of the top 8, we had a Mew Fusion Mew VMAX. Again, nothing too crazy in this list. Lost in top 8 to the Miraidon. And the Miraidon was playing the Spiritomb, so that is an interesting tech for the Mew matchup. Obviously turns off the Genesect Vs. However, in the Fusion Mew matchup, it doesn't matter as much because they can put the Fusion Strike energies on the Genesect Vs to still draw through that Spiritomb's ability lock. However, the Miraidon deck just proved to be too fast and aggressive for Mew overall. And then we had another Miraidon list, pretty similar to the first place list. They did choose to play the Future Booster Energy Capsule, which I think is very interesting. One of the things is that your Charizard matchup is a little bit difficult, but if you play the Future Booster Energy Capsule, you can take 3 prizes on the Pidgeot EX with Iron Hands, and that can certainly swing the matchup in your favor. And then they did play a 15th energy where the winning list only played 14 energies. Then rounding out the top 8, we had a Giratina V-Star, seen as one of the best decks of this current format. Pretty standard list here, opting for the 2 Pokegear over things like Iono that some other lists play, and also playing the Spiritomb, respecting that Mew matchup as well. And then moving on to the final deck of top 8, we had Charizard EX, respecting that mirror match in this list, obviously playing the Justified Gloves and playing a 1-1-1 split of Collapse, Stadium, Artisan, and Lost City as well. Also playing the Radiant Charizard, which has been pretty staple. Some lists play it, some lists don't. And then playing a 3-3-3 split of Arvin, Boss's Orders, and Iono. I know some Charizard lists had started to move towards a 4 Iono count, but choosing to just play the 3 Iono in this list. So overall, this top 8 really quite interesting with the 2 Miraidons, but everything else is something that we would expect to see in the top 8 at Vancouver. So Miraidon really was the big surprise here. And the question is, how do these results of the top 8 translate over to the Temporal Forces format? I think the first thing to note is that Miraidon seems to be almost non-existent in the post-rotation format. It's really turned into the Turbo Hands Baby Miraidon Future Box deck, and it's similar to Miraidon, but different enough that it's obviously a very different deck, but can play a little bit similarly to Miraidon and is sort of the replacement for Miraidon in the post-rotation format. And so I wouldn't be surprised to see a lot of players who enjoyed playing Miraidon in this format moving over to playing that Turbo Hands Future Box sort of deck. Snorlax, obviously a big threat in the Temporal Forces format as well, gained a lot of tools, including that Eerie supporter, which can discard item cards from your opponent's hand, but it did lose a few things in terms of Peonia, Sydney, and that Echoing Horn as well. And so Snorlax still a very good deck, but it does have some tough matchups in the Temporal Forces format. Lugia, for example, is a very rough matchup for Snorlax, as well as Giratina V-Star still being present in the meta. Gardevoir loses a lot of cards to rotation, and so it will have to come back in a different form using Drifloons and Bravery Charms and all that sort of thing as attackers, rather than having those Shining Arcana Gardevoirs. I think that Gardevoir could still be a good deck in the meta. So far, we haven't seen great results from it online. I know that some other players who enjoyed playing Gardevoir in this format have said that they don't feel that the deck is too bad in the post-rotation format in its other form. So we could see Gardevoir kind of come out as a surprise at EOIC and do very well if players are kind of testing it in the background. We haven't seen a lot of great online results from it, however. Mew VMAX is completely gone from rotation. It loses everything. All of the cards basically rotate, so Mew VMAX is no longer around. We already touched on Miraidon a little bit, but Giratina V-Star is an interesting one. Giratina V-Star loses Path to the Peak, which is tough for it because it kind of wanted to play as a come-from-behind deck, utilizing massive disruption in that Roxanne, the counter catchers, and Path to the Peak. However, Giratina V-Star does seem to be hanging strong with the Iron Leaves EX addition to the deck, as well as either that Maximum Belt or Prime Catcher. It seems to have a pretty good Charizard matchup still, although I do think that it suffers against the Lugia and Xianpao matchups specifically. Giratina is still a strong deck. About as inconsistent as ever. Whether you thought it was consistent or inconsistent, you'll probably still think that in the Temporal Forces format. Nothing really changes there. If you didn't like Giratina and you thought it was an inconsistent deck, you'll probably still feel that in the Temporal Forces format. If you did like Giratina, you'll probably still like it into the Temporal Forces format, but you can't really deny that losing that Path to the Peak does hurt the deck. And then Charizard still seemed to be sort of the top threat in the Temporal Forces format. And nothing really changes for the deck all too much. You gain Buddy Buddy Poffin, and you don't have to worry about Path to the Peak anymore, and you gain the maximum belt as well. And I think that Charizard just is expected to be a top deck at UIC. You still have to worry about things like Chien-Pao. The Lugia matchup can be rough, and Stall is certainly as bad as ever. However, there may be some techs that players want to play in the Charizard deck to make that Stall matchup a little bit better. A few things that I've seen just randomly on the ladder. I had an opponent playing a Jet Energy plus Spiritomb, and so they could bench the Spiritomb, Jet Energy active, and then pick it back up with its attack, and basically forcing you to use your counter catchers over and over while they're able to attack essentially every other turn utilizing that Spiritomb Jet Energy strategy. Obviously, that Jet Energy can be turned off by the temples, so maybe that's not the perfect response to the Snorlax decks for Charizard, but people are playing Professor Tro's scenario and Palpad as well, so a lot of different strategies for Charizard to potentially try to counter that Stall matchup as well. So this was a quick overview of the Vancouver Regionals and an overview of how some of these results might translate into the Temporal Forces format as we go into UIC. I know a lot of players are testing very hard, a lot of online tournaments happening in the new format, and I'm excited to see what decks come out on top at UIC. Hopefully this video was helpful for you. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, leave a like, comment, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you in the next video.